Thanks for being here, guys. We've got a lot to discuss today. And first up, I want to discuss the fact that the Princess of Wales's Together at Christmas concert is coming up this week. There's been a lot of excitement ahead of this, and she's just sent out quite an emotional letter. I want to read a snippet. The Christmas story encourages us to consider the experiences and feelings of others. It also reflects our own vulnerabilities and reminds us of the importance of giving and receiving empathy, as well as just how much we need each other in spite of our differences. I can't help but feel there's a real public vulnerability to the Princess these days after everything she's been through. Do you think that's fair to say?
I do. I think it's a really, I think it's a lovely and emotional letter. And in fact, there was a comment on Instagram and someone was saying, I wish you'd written dear friend rather than dear guest. And I thought, actually, I really agreed with that comment because there's such an intimacy and, as you say, a sort of emotional vulnerability in her message. We know the theme for the Together at Christmas Carol concert is going to be empathy and love. This is all about bringing together people and communities, carers, givers, people who've made sacrifices during times of hardship. So that's a lovely, lovely theme. And I think it does feel very relevant given the quite poignant and clearly turbulent year that the royals have gone through. And I'm looking forward to seeing the royal family come together for Kate's annual festive concert. I think there'll be members of her family come together for it as well. Of course, we won't see it until Christmas Eve, but it's an important occasion for her, and I think this has been a way of her getting her message out, which is that in times of hardship, we lean in together, we depend on each other, and this is just a message of hope and optimism, which I think is really quite moving and lovely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know that she's found a lot of support from her family. They've been crucial to her in getting through this very difficult year. And also, she's found a lot of comfort in communing with nature, for want of a better phrase. The great outdoors, the woodlands, particularly, I think, when they've been up at Animal Hall around Sandringham. And we've also seen, we've heard, particularly via Robert Hardman, if I remember rightly, that her faith has been has become stronger, I think, because of what she's been through. And so I felt that all of those themes were reflected in her message and in the themes of the Carol concert, which I'm really looking forward to seeing.
And there's something that some people have pointed out is that there's a real emphasis on empathy, understanding and forgiveness. Now, I need to ask, I'm not going to use the phrase olive branch. However, there has been some suggestion that this could be a subtle edging toward peace, potentially toward two members of the family, US-based. Do you think there's any possibility that's true, or do you think that's reading a little bit too much into it?
Well, I did think that when I saw Forgiveness, and I thought that she was also opening herself up to criticism, as she had done with a previous message about dealing with addiction, that people, where she was talking about understanding people on social media who are supporters of Harry and Meghan, was saying she hadn't shown much understanding to her brother-in-law and sister-in-law. So I did wonder about that. I tried to sound out people close to her, but they were adamant that they weren't offering any guidance on what was the message behind the message, if you like. So I guess that leaves us all open to interpret it whatever way we like, but I can't be certain what she meant.
Which the Princess would surely have known when she wrote it, that it will always be open to interpretation, particularly with that kind of language.
I mean, when you consider in the past, she has very much acted as a peacemaker. I mean, I always remember that time, Richard and I were talking earlier about the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral off air, because we were just talking about what an exceptionally busy period it has been for us as royal correspondents. And I remember watching that moment when the Princess sort of ushered William and Harry together as they walked up the hill and back up to the castle, and sort of seeing her play that role of peacemaker when, they really weren't talking. I mean, I think the problem has been that it's not just, Kate's been thrown under the bus by Harry. He's said hurtful things about her. He's brought the children into the narrative. I think the Prince of Wales remains very, very angry and upset and feels very betrayed. Possibly the Princess of Wales is still open to a reconciliation in some form. I still feel it's quite early, but I do think when you go through something like a cancer diagnosis and you go through the sort of journey that she has done and you confront your own mortality, you realise life is short. It's far too short for rifts and family feuds, and perhaps that will be a role that she will play at some point in healing that rift, because I think we look to the royal family as a symbol of unity.
Yeah.
We will want to see them together at Christmas. This will be, what, is it the 6th Christmas, Richard, that Harry won't have been a part of it?
I think you might be right. Yeah.
So, you know, I do think it's important, and it may be that people are making these comments on social media where you're talking about togetherness, you're talking about empathy, what's going on in your own family, and they are at risk of that happening. And I think she's also someone who's always led by example, you know, in that sort of way of being a role model. So I think, and I was speaking to sources close to the Princess and to William, who said, you know, never give up hope. There's always a chance, but of course it's always in the timing.
And back to the Princess herself, you've both been in the royal orbit for so long. The version of her that we're seeing, you know, through such emotional language in the letter, and she put out a statement, as you mentioned, on addiction. Do you think that we will continue to see this more vulnerable side of her going forward, or will it sort of pull back a little as it gets back to business as usual?
That's a good question. I suspect we probably will see a bit more of it. I mean, she's developed so much as a person over the last few years since, you know, if you go back to 2010, 2011, she was really quite wooden when she was on television. Her public speaking skills weren't brilliant because she's just a naturally shy person. But I think she's got much better at public speaking. And I think it probably suits her, that sort of air of vulnerability a little bit. And I mean, you know, as royal reporters, we don't get to speak to them that often. You know, it is a really unusual specialism that you are still quite away from them most of the time. But when you do, when I've spoken to her anyway, I mean, I've always been impressed by the fact that she wants to know about you and what you think, which some of the ones who've been born into the family are less prone to do, because I think they've just been brought up to be the centre of attention. Everybody stays quiet while they speak. Hopefully we will see more of that.
And as for the actual concert itself, of course, that's on this week, and there is a lot of excitement. What are each of you most looking forward to seeing?
I think just the family coming together, and I mean, don't forget she's performed at the concert in previous years. I mean, I'm not saying she's going to, and we you know, it would be wonderful. But I suspect that she's going to want to the year to close what's really been a difficult year with a message, with something. So I'm hoping there'll be a surprise for us in there. But I think just to see her with her family, with her children, looking well, which she clearly does after a tough year, I think that gives so many people hope. And just go back to Richard's point he was making about Catherine and her empathy. I mean, I think in all of this, and we've discussed this before, you know, these twin cancer diagnoses, these journeys that they've been on have been great levellers for the royal family. They've been great connectors between what has always been us and them. And they just feel, I think, more real, more relatable. They're not immune to what so many people go through. And I think it has connected them to the public in a really powerful way.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. In a way that probably there's no other way that could really have connected
I agree.
them. Yeah. And also it will be a bit more business as usual this week, because as we go to record, there's a big state visit happening and we'll see the Princess out with other royals. So what's on this week for the royals?
Well, I mean, it's probably Kate's busiest week of the year so far. And she you know, the plan certainly was that she wouldn't be doing all of the state visit, not going to the state banquet. But, you know, we've been expecting to see her escorting the Emir and Shaker to Horse Guards Parade, back to the palace in the coach procession, and then having lunch at the palace, seeing the exhibits afterwards, walking round. And then the carol concert. I suppose to many people, you say, well, she's just got to turn up for an hour or so. But she's been planning this for months. And, OK, she'll have had an army of people helping her, but she's still overseeing it. She'll have been deeply involved in the preparations. And, you know, I did ask about the actual carol concert itself because, you know, there's a format where she goes to meet the performers beforehand. She'll meet children and other people, other guests in the Abbey. And I wondered whether, because of her, you know, still frailty, her recovery, she's still in recovery mode, whether that might be curtailed a bit. But no, she's doing the full programme. So I think that's a really encouraging sign.
Absolutely.
I think they've got such a huge amount of work to do to win back the British public. They felt that Harry and Meghan wanted all the trappings without the responsibilities that come with being working members of the royal family.
But I think, if it was Marlborough, then that would be a breaking of the mould. I wonder if that's where the compromise will be.
There is a difference between what the firm does as a business, if you like, for work, and how they are in private. And they are, I think, still very much a family.
I want to move along and talk about something else that will be happening in the coming days, which is the upcoming premiere of the very long-awaited new Netflix series by Prince Harry and Meghan, who are executive producing the series Polo, all about the sport polo. So they undeniably had huge commercial success with Harry and Meghan, the series they had before, and they around the same time, Harry's memoir Spare was also released. Do you think that, given that they've had some commercial challenges since then, do you think this show looks to be something that will help them win back Hollywood?
How interested are people in polo? I mean, I think that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, Richard and I, over the years, have seen quite a few polo matches, right?
Yes.
I still don't understand how this game works or is played. It's like a law unto itself. I think when you watch the trailer, which is it's beautifully produced, it's quite slick. I mean, I'm thinking Rivals on the moment on Disney is doing super well. Jilly Cooper, of course, did a best-selling book called Polo. There is the potential, actually, for it to do well. I just think the problem is that getting bums on seats in the wake of the Harry and Meghan docu-series, which was such compelling viewing because it was about them leaving, it was about their new lives. People wanted to tune in and watch that. I just don't think this is going to have the same mass appeal. I mean, when you compare it to the documentary that Harry did on the Invictus Games, which is arguably far more worthy a topic than polo, which is a bit racy and a little bit different. I mean, the viewing figures of that, they were okay. But I think the idea that anything's going to match that docuseries is probably pretty far-fetched. So let's wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, this is their problem, that people are interested in their royal lives, but they're not necessarily interested in other things that they produce. I mean, my understanding was, that the Invictus series was a disappointment in terms of viewing figures. And polo, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, I go and I've seen countless polo matches, and I'm still don't really understand the rules.
He always used to send the ball in our direction, didn't he? Do you remember?
Yeah.
We'd be in the media pen, and suddenly this ball would come hurtling at great speed, very close towards us. And it's an exciting game, and it's got all of those sort of ingredients. It's sport, it's fast, it's pacey, lots of men in it. I mean, it might turn out to be a surprise hit. I'm just not too convinced.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of women, obviously women tend to be more into the royals than men, I'd say. And over the years, a lot of women have gone on to me about, men in white, tight white trousers. And so I can see that might be appealing. And as you say, the Jilly Cooper adaptation, that seems to have gone down well.
I think it probably would have had a better chance if he was in it, but as far as we're aware, he's not. He's exec producing, and that's quite a big risk, because you've obviously got Meghan doing her cookery show. She's going to be very central to that, and I still think there is that curiosity factor about both of them. But I think you want to see them. When Harry comes to life when he's on screen, he's actually he's pretty good at it. So it'll be interesting to see how his exec production debut goes.
And you've hit the nail on the head there. I think authenticity for members of the royal family can be a really hard note for them to hit, because they don't want to give away too much of themselves, but they also want to connect in a way with the public. And I think that's something that Harry and Meghan, the same as the others, have struggled with. But it does feel like if he's leaning into a passion area of his now, which is polo, and Meghan has this new cooking and lifestyle show coming out, as well as her brand, it seems that they are realising that strategy now of authenticity. Do you think that will help them overall with the public, win back favour?
No, in a word. Not over here, I don't think so. I think they've got such a huge amount of work to do to win back the British public. The majority, clearly there are people, particularly younger people. I always say the younger, darker skinned you are, the more likely you are to be sympathetic to them. But obviously there are all sorts of people who still remain sympathetic to them. But the majority do not. And I think it's because they felt that Harry and Meghan wanted all the trappings without the responsibilities that come with being working members of the royal family.
Yeah.
So I think they've got a problem. And of course the other thing about polo, I mean, there was a really interesting piece in the Sunday Times at the weekend about this, and it was contrasting some of their messages, particularly Harry's messages on the environment, with polo, which is sort of quite a carbon-heavy sport, transporting all those horses around everywhere, and the amount of money. It's an elitist sport. I think there are something like 250 clubs maybe in the US, but it's not it's not a sport that the majority of people either side of the pond follow closely.
And in fairness, though, you get shows like this. Is completely unsponsored me mentioning it, but shows like I think it's Drive to Survive is the Formula One, which is a similar argument can be made. That's a very expensive sport. But also, as we were talking about it, I was thinking about I've never had any real passion or interest in polo before now, but I'm also not interested in farming, and I love Clarkson's farm. So who knows?
You never know. I think it's also just worth making the point that Harry's always used polo, as William has, to raise money for charity. When we used to go to these polo matches, they would raise millions of pounds for their charities. So, and I think that is also part of this. I don't think anyone has a problem with them doing Netflix. One of the key reasons they left the royal family was to have financial independence as well as independence. And so we're expecting them to go and make money and be commercial in that respect. But I think we also expect it to have a philanthropic tie as well. I think that makes it more acceptable, for want of a better word. So I'll be interested to see how much charity there is in this, because as I say, polo's always been a very charitable thing for them. So we have to wait and see.
So we'll see. I think that's being released on December 10th. So we'll see how people react to it then, I guess. So moving along, there were some quotes from you, Katie, about the fact that there's a very significant decision looming for Prince George in regards to his schooling, and it seems to be the case that Kate and William are a little bit at odds over where he should go, whether it should be boarding school or to a co-ed school. Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're going to have to make a decision quite soon about which school Prince George will go to, because Lambrook, which is the school that all three children are at in Berkshire, is a pre-prep. So, and over here in the UK, there is a natural progression where you go at 13 to your next school. And in the case of William and Harry, that was Eton. We know Harry didn't have a particularly happy time there, but William did. He loved Eton and he thrived at Eton and went on, of course, to St Andrews and did very well there. Catherine was a pupil at Marlborough. She's always loved that idea of a co-ed school. And in fact, before the children were at Lambrook, they were at Thomas's in Battersea, and that was co-ed. Kate's own experience was going to school with her brother James and her sister Pippa. There's always the option that they could go to Marlborough. I think it's less the boarding element, because Kate boarded and loved it. William boarded and loved it. And I think that they think that's part of the making of their children becoming young adults. I think the big question is it going to be sort of Eton and following in tradition, and obviously George going to an all-boys school, or will they break with tradition and go to a co-ed? So I don't think they're at loggerheads, and I'm just not dressing this up as a row. It's a big decision that they've got to make. They've been round to see the schools, and at some point, I guess we will know what they've chosen to do.
Personally, I think it's a great shame that our future head of state doesn't actually go to a state school, and I think it would be fantastic if that were to happen, but that clearly isn't going to happen, because the way it works here is you go from about age 11 to a state school, whereas to a private independent public school, whatever you want to call it, they tend to go at 13. And I had a spell as an education reporter, and people used to, I can remember quite a few people saying to me, if you're worried about the academic performance of your kids, if you've got boys, you want them to go to an all-boys school. Sorry, if you've got boys, you want them to go to a co-ed school, and if you've got girls, you want them to go to an all-girls school, so they don't have the distractions, I think. But my guess is that George will end up going to Eton, but it is just a guess. Yeah. I think Katie's right. I think it's it's second nature for people of their social background to send their kids away. I mean, clearly, if George is at Eton, they're just round the corner. But I think what tends to happen is that the kids themselves, they don't want to be going from home every day, because they're not then part of really at the heart of the school community. you want to be a boarder. So I'm guessing that that all of the kids will end up boarding, even if they're going to schools very close.
Even conversations though about the possibility of there being something different for George than has been for previous heirs. Do you think that we will see his path deviate, in other ways? Because Kate and William seem to be wanting to at least explore possibilities of doing things differently.
Yes, maybe, and maybe he'll have a term at a state school. As part maybe Eton's got some scheme, or wherever he goes has got a scheme swapping with the state school. But clearly, that's me expressing my personal opinion. It's up to them. Every parent should have a choice of what school they send their kids to. Clearly, they're not going to be too worried about the extra 20% VAT on school fees.
I think they're quite traditionalist in that respect. And we were talking about polo earlier. George plays polo. He's learning to fly helicopters. He's very like his father in that.
Photo of him getting that massive cuddle from the rugby players.
Yes.
Rugby players. And it's moments like that. I think we see a lot more of that these days with the Royals. Anyway, thank you both so much for your insights. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.